Hello, and welcome back to Papa Scares Horror Stories. In this episode, I bring you 4 unnerving encounters with black-eyed children. I hope you enjoy. And with that said, let's begin. Okay, I'm ready to share my story. I've been lurking for a long time. I actually joined Reddit because a friend of mine told me about this sub. Unfortunately, this particular sub seems a bit slow. And even to me, my story sounds ridiculous. But another Reddit user convinced me to post on this thread. And now that it's already out there, I decided to post here too. Okay, I'm telling this story here for the first time. The only other people who know about this are my immediate family members. I know it sounds completely fabricated, and I have no way to prove any of it. But it happened. I'll do my best. I'm originally from Ireland. I moved to the States roughly 20 years back. This story takes place in County Clare, Ireland, when I was about 15 years old. One afternoon I was walking through the woods near my home. I was alone. I was a loner in my youth, and I would often stroll the woods until I found a tree to sit beneath and write. Writing has always been my hobby. My point is that I was very familiar with these woods. I felt safe there. On this particular day, I was walking a path to a specific tree that was my favorite to sit beneath. The sounds of the woods were all around me. There was a gentle breeze, and while I couldn't see the birds, I could hear them. It was comforting. And then it all stopped. Everything became unnaturally still. The air was still. The birds stopped twittering. I no longer heard a single thing. I had never experienced this before. It was as if I had suddenly become deaf. There was just nothing. No sound, no movement, no breeze. At this point, I had started to become anxious. I wasn't yet afraid, but I started home anyway. The feeling in the woods was not what I was used to. I was no longer comforted, so I decided to go home. It was then that I saw movement from the corner of my eye. Nothing I could pinpoint, but a dark shape that was just there. And then it wasn't. Everything else was still that eerie calm. I started to walk faster. And then the black shape again. This time on my other side. Now I was afraid. I began to run. I still heard nothing, but I was sure something was chasing me. When I reached my home, I ran inside and slammed the door, fully expecting my mum to yell at me for slamming. But she wasn't there. In fact, nobody was home. That was a bit odd, but not unheard of. Finally, gaining some sanity, I decided I needed tea. Now. So I began to boil the water for tea. And then there was a knock at the door. I jumped. My heart rose to my throat. Nobody knocked in these parts. It was a small village where everyone knew everyone else. Everyone was family. There was no knocking. There was a friendly, "Oi there," and then people came in, so a knock was strange. I crept over to the glass in the door and peeked out. I noticed 2 things right away that terrified and confused me. The first was a child, a girl of maybe 10 or 12, looking not at me, but at her feet. The second thing scared me to my toes. It was getting dark. How was that possible? I had left to go on my walk in midday. The sun had been fully out, and I had been gone no longer than 40 minutes. How then was it dark? I looked at the clock. It was almost 7. How? How had I misplaced 5 hours? The knock came again, and I jumped again. I didn't open the door. I called out, "Oi there, can I help ya?" The girl didn't look up. She said, "I need to come in. Please let me in." She had no accent. She wasn't Irish. There was no lilt to her voice. She sounded American. I called out again. "I can't let you in, but I'll ring someone if you need help." The child didn't look up. She said, "No, that won't work. I need to come in." At this point, I had had enough of the strange, scary child. She was freaking me out. I wanted my mum. I wanted my dad. I wanted to know where 5 hours of my life had gone. And I was so frightened at this point that not even tea was going to help. So I did what any teenage girl would do when faced with a situation such as this. I screamed and ran to my bed, covered myself with my blanket, and waited for my mum to come home. This was pre-cellular phones, and I was not going to risk going to the kitchen to phone someone. Plus, I had no idea who I would call. The girl was still knocking on the door, but she never moved to a window or to the back door. She stayed at the front door. After a while, I got my nerve up to go check again. It had been silent for a bit. I went to the door and looked at the glass. The girl was still there, but she was no longer at the door. She was sitting on the fence. She was no longer looking down. She was looking right at me, and in the fading light, it looked like her eyes were pitch black. I screamed again and ran back to the safety of my blanket. Eventually, my mum came home. I told her what happened. She decided that it was my overactive imagination, but she did call down to the shops and the pub to find out if anyone in town had American family visiting or of anyone who knew who the girl was. Nobody did. My grandmother told me I had survived an encounter with the fairies, and that I was lucky. She was the only one who ever believed me. I never saw the girl again. I never had missing time again. I never felt the absolute stillness in the woods again when I got up my courage to go back. After I moved to the States, and years later, I heard of black-eyed children. My story seemed to coincide with that. But that's ridiculous, right? I still have no explanation. Demon? Fairy? The Fae are said to be evil and will kidnap children, and the woods was near Fairy Hill. Ghost? Black-eyed child? I don't know. But it happened. I swear to that. Update. Thank you to those who are kind enough to respond. Because of the questions asked here, I did phone my Gran. Gran at this point is well into her 90s and doesn't understand the interwebs as she calls them. As such, she has instructed me to tell everyone hello for her, LOL. I asked her a bit more about the limitations of fairies. She had some input that I shall share with you here. I'll do my best to use her words here. She said that the Fae are divided into two groups. Those that are evil and collect souls, specifically of children, to act as slaves to the Fae King, and those that are kind and who like to help humans. It is said that the evil Fae are in fact known to take the shape of a human child or a beautiful woman, depending on the prey, as those are the two shapes that are most pleasing and will garner the most sympathy from humans. She did not have information regarding the eyes of the Fae, but she did say that the Fae cannot enter a person's home because that is protected by human energy. She did not know if they could enter if invited, but she didn't see why not, since that would lower the guard that surrounds the home. My Gran has never heard of black-eyed children. However, she did say that when the Irish first came to America, they brought relics and pieces of the fairy hills with them. Keep in mind though, that my Gran is an awful lot like the father in the Big Fat Greek wedding movies. She believes that everything was invented or made better by the Irish, and that everything can somehow be traced to Ireland. She said another thing that I didn't even ask her about, but that she gave to me without prompt. She said that the Fae are attracted to thoughts of themselves, meaning that if you spend a great deal of time thinking of or speaking of them, that you are more likely to come across one. I thought that interesting since I didn't ask her about that, but if I remember correctly, is part of BEK law. As a final thought, she said you can protect yourself by salting your windows and doors and saging the inside of your home. So there you have it. If nothing else, it is another path to explore. My partner and I had a BEK experience, and we are suffering. This happened a couple of weeks ago when myself and two of my partners, who will be referred to as K and W, decided on visiting this 150-year-old graveyard at night. Now, I am a sensitive, empath, indigo, whatever. W and K are blocked off energy-wise. The walk in the cemetery was dark and peaceful at first. We wandered a while and read some stones, and eventually at a crossroads, K noticed something and walked off. He came back and whispered, "There's someone over there. I'm going to check it out." The moment he walked away again, I felt eyes watching me from everywhere, and an overwhelming primal sense of fear. I froze, and W strained to see what K was looking at. About 7 or 8 minutes later, K was back and looking spooked. He told me that there was a stone white figure darting through the trees. I was asked if I wanted to leave, and I said no, so we stayed and wandered a little more. After a little longer, we came across this huge marble mausoleum, the door of which was made of glass, and you could see through it. Getting closer set me off. Everything felt wrong, and the dread was back. There was an extremely prickly feeling all over my skin. Kay touched the door and felt it too. Both Kay and myself saw a shadow moving around inside the mausoleum as we stood there, and the moment he touched the door, the shadow disappeared. We ran, eventually finding a place to sit for a moment. I was completely overwhelmed and continuing to feel like we were being watched. Kay was really freaking out, getting dizzy and very quiet. He seemed really off, like he'd seen something I hadn't. I was asked again if I wanted to leave, and this time I said yes. We left, and the whole walk home, myself and Kay felt the dread again, that inhuman primal fear. Once we got home, W immediately fell asleep on the couch, while Kay and I began to panic. Both of us felt extremely dizzy and weak, and then knocking. It started softly, only 3. As time went on, it got more and more frantic sounding, but not much harder. We couldn't shake the dread for a good 30 or so minutes. When the dread left, we were left drained mentally and physically, and decided on going upstairs and attempting to get some sleep. We assured each other that if it was a BEK, that we didn't open the door, thus we are safe. At some point while watching TV to try and calm down, I got overheated, and Kay opened the door to the upstairs patio and turned on the fan. That was another thing we did wrong. Around 3:20 a.m, Kay woke up, and he remembers only being able to move his head around. The door had opened on its own about halfway, and a child who looked about 12, with extremely messy shortish hair and face covered by a shadow, was standing there and staring. He remembers the most intense terror he's ever felt, so much that it physically hurt. He shut his eyes and held them closed until the terror passed, and he fell back asleep. The house was already haunted, different story, but the activity has been kicked up a notch or 2. The cat goes nuts because of it. Since then, for both me and Kay, depression and anxiety has become much more intense than it has been in a very long time. I can't sleep at night, and neither can Kay. There has been a constant dull ringing in my ears. Occasionally dread so bad it hurts will take over Kay for 20 to 30 minutes. and I've been having random pains in various parts of my abdomen. TVs, radios and lights turn on and off by themselves, and we are both constantly feeling watched and intense fear. I can't find any sources on how to deal with or get rid of BEKs. I also practice witchcraft, and nothing I've done, casting circles, salt, cleanings, etc., has worked. Whatever BEKs are, whatever they want, is having effects on our physical and mental health. I feel so drained. Someone tell me what to do. Please. Non-believer's first encounter. I'm a believer in many things paranormal, with BEKs being one of the stories I thought was an urban legend until early this morning. I'm the assistant manager of the Pizza Hut in my town, and my GM has me on the late night shift so he doesn't have to anymore. It was a little after 2 a.m, and around that time is when the external lights of the building cut off, leaving the parking lot almost pitch black. The driver and I were in the very back of the store finishing up dough prep and dishes as we normally do. I like to say that I am attuned to the paranormal, since I have witnessed many things throughout my 21 years of existing on this planet. While we were in a conversation about sales and what to prep, I started to feel unnerved. I ignored it due to anxiety and stressing over a homeless man making a scene a couple of hours prior to close. But the feeling didn't go away, so I made a patrol around the restaurant. I looked out of the front doors first, since the highway gives out front a little bit of light, but there was nothing. I looked out the windows in the dining room, but still nothing. It wasn't until I decided to look out the drive-through window that I saw it. Standing about 3-ish yards away from the window was a girl in a dress, barely illuminated by the lights that were still cooling down outside. She was pale and had hair that fell just past her shoulders. As an adult, my first thought was, what is that kid doing out in 34 degrees Fahrenheit weather in the pouring rain? But then our eyes met, and I saw that hers were a jet black color. I recoiled from the window and ran over to the safe to get my phone out of it. We have to keep our phones locked up during business hours, and I don't have to have my phone glued to me 24/7, so I normally just leave it in there until I need it. By the time I got it out and ran back to the drive-thru, she wasn't there, and I didn't see her again for the entire time we were there. I know the stories say they come to the doors of homes and try to get in, and as long as you don't invite them in, you're fine. But she just stood there and then vanished. I am still on the edge from the whole situation. The believer of the paranormal in me also makes me wonder if it could have been a spirit, which scares me more. My first encounter with a demon was one that portrayed itself as a child, so who knows. I just had to post my story somewhere. My girlfriend thinks I'm crazy. My general manager, who also believes in things such as this, is now freaking out. Black-eyed man. I work retail. I'm checking this sweet old couple out at the register. Having a wholehearted typical retail worker speaking to customer conversation, and then boom! I look into the husband's eyes for the first time. This man has jet black eyes. Store goes silent. No one's speaking. I'm overcome with an overwhelming feeling of dread. I wasn't exactly terrified. I was more entranced. Again, the whole store is dead silent. It's as if I've been gripped from my reality and brought into this old man's dimension. I wish I could tell you guys. I looked at my surroundings to see why everyone went quiet, but I was just so overcome with a plethora of emotions, staring into this man's completely black eyes, that I just physically couldn't look away. And then, just like that, the man leaves with his wife. I hand him his receipt. He takes his things and leaves. I was out of breath. I had to take my break early. I'm ashamed to admit, I was almost ready to cry. I've literally never been through anything, and I mean anything like that. I did some research when I got home, and I found out a lot about black-eyed children. What was strange about this situation was that the man had to be late 60s, early 70s. What could this mean? It's just so hard to imagine a man casually wearing black contact lenses, and these weren't enlarged pupils. There was not an ounce of white in his eyeballs, and that feeling of dread, the silent stare, and the time that seemed to go on forever. This had to be an encounter. I know what I saw. And I promise you all, this story is 100% true. I'm worried no one will believe me, but I feel like this would be the best place to share my experience. Thank you very much for watching. That was 4 unnerving encounters with black-eyed kids, and 1 adult. I hope you enjoyed them. A huge thank you to the Reddit users who were kind enough to allow me to use their stories. I couldn't do this without you. Links to the original stories are in the description below. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to comment, like, and subscribe if you're new. If you have any stories you would like me to read, please send them to scarepapa@gmail.com. The details are in the description below. Once again, thank you very much for watching, and stay safe.